And it's just important to remember that when they divide us, we are weaker, and that's exactly what they want. Canada is in an incredible state of decay right now, and this is exactly what happens when an economy goes all in on a housing bubble. Basically, the housing bubble in Canada has sucked investment capital away from productive things, such as going into the manufacturing of more goods. And basically, the housing market sucking up and vacuuming up all this capital has led to the collapse that Canada is now experiencing. And the collapse in the housing market is not to be ignored. And a lot of people right now in markets that are still rising or are stagnating and at all-time highs, such as Calgary and Edmonton, are probably thinking, well, this time is different here. We're not going to be hit. And when you look at how potentially tariffs could impact places like Calgary, they could have a major impact on the economy there. And not only that, the tariffs on other things such as oil and gas are also going to have a profound impact on the Canadian economy. Now, a lot of people inside and even outside the United States seem to think that the tariffs and the Make America Great isolationist style movement is actually a good thing. But if we go back in time and look at history, after World War I, the United States turned extremely isolationist, and basically that led to a decade of prosperity that was then led by the Great Depression. And the Great Depression was exacerbated by the problem that the United States had been incredibly isolationist leading up until that point. And because the United States was very inward looking, for the next nearly 30 years, you basically had massive global unrest. You had the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, and you also had the rise of Imperial Japan, which led to World War II. So the United States being isolationist is not good for the United States, and it's not good for the global economy, and it's not good for global prosperity either. And it's quite easy to see the primary beneficiary of US isolationism. It's going to be China. Whether you hate Trump or like him, you have to look at the view of the world from the outside. And like I said, whether you hate him or like him, the view to most people is that they don't like him. And this is most people outside of the United States, and they don't like his policies and the way he's so isolationist and anti-other countries. And that is leading to the rise in anti-US sentiment, which is not good for the United States at all, and again benefits China. And you can see how the power of China actually rising could lead to a similar type of scenario like a world war like was endured in the 20th century. And I really hope that that doesn't happen, because a world war is definitely something that you don't want to see the world endure. But you can definitely see how these type of policies are not really beneficial to the United States or the world. And basically where Canada is right now, they are in an incredibly precarious place because they have been exposed by reliance on the housing bubble. That housing bubble is imploding right now, along with another bubble that Canada has heavily relied on, which is the immigration bubble. You see, Canada has done the complete opposite of the United States, relying too much on foreign growth, and that has meant that via population growth, Canada has been incredibly reliant on immigration, and now sentiment has changed due to the cost of living crisis, and that is meaning that more and more you are seeing Canadians who want less and less immigration. And not only that, the economy is so weak because of the housing bubble imploding and because of various other factors that most of the people who are coming to Canada, the newcomers, are actually going to job banks. If you look at this National Post article, it says that lots of these newcomers are actually ending up at food banks, which is not a good thing. So obviously you're in a state of depression if you've got your population, or a large chunk of it, which can't afford to eat. You've even seen food banks in places like Mississauga, where nearly 10% of the population rely on food banks, that are now laying off workers workers at the food banks because, yes, they can't afford it because they need to preserve food supplies because they are going through an unprecedented time of demand right now in the Canadian Depression. And it's easy to see that the US economy isn't doing so well either. And with the yield curves that inverted back in 2022, we knew that a 1990s magnitude recession was on the way. And just to remind you, the 1990s recession was one of the worst recessions ever experienced in Canada. And not only that, in the 1990s and in the late 1980s, you had a massive amount of financial institutions and mortgage companies that went bust during that time. So it seems that history rhymes, but it doesn't repeat entirely, as you're seeing a lot of different things between the 1990s housing bubble and the housing bubble right now in Canada repeat. And that's the thing. I think it's important to reflect at this point and look at what's happened and look at all the narratives that you were told that it was going to be immigration that powered this thing, that it was going to be the economy that powered this thing. Whatever you were told was going to power this housing bubble, it's now easy to see is not correct at all, as we've seen immigration that has continued to ramp up, and despite that, you've seen housing prices that have gone down. And I think it's important to acknowledge this and think about this, because in the future, it's likely that we're going to see housing bubbles again and again, repeating themselves. And it's obvious what the governments of the world want to do now when it comes to the next crisis event, is they're going to print massive amounts of money and they're going to be handing out more and more stimulus. I mean, some of the election promises on the campaign trail in Ontario have just been for flat out stimulus. You've had the Alberta government that pursued stimulus on their election campaign, and you've also had the Liberals and NDP saying that they were planning on passing a pandemic style stimulus program in response to the tariff. So the thing is, it's always important to think about the consequences and trade-offs of these policies. And when you look at since March 2020, when the Liberals came out with the pandemic stimulus, you can see that gold is up over 65% against the Canadian dollar. So even though gold is practically at all-time highs right now against the Canadian dollar, it again just shows that since that stimulus, if you held it, it's providing some protection against what is going on. And I really see it as insurance against government stupidity. And faced with more and more government stupidity, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, I think it's important just to use critical thinking here and not get obsessed and polarized like many Canadians and Americans alike are doing. It's really, really dangerous, and the world becomes a weaker place when everybody is just polarized and can't even see when their team is actually doing things that aren't going to benefit them, and they're just blinded by this polarization. And I think that's the really important message to think about. There is all this polarization right now, whether you're in the United States or whether you're in Canada. And it's just important to remember that when they divide us, we are weaker, and that's exactly what they want. You've got authoritarians that are in charge in both countries, and they're just opposite sides of the aisle. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, I'd highly recommend that you check out this video here. And if you're looking for a VPN and want to help protect your privacy and help out the channel, then please go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. Thank you so much for watching this video.